Therefore, in the initial generation of the resolve, it is the great compassion which is foremost. It is on account of the mind of compassion that one becomes able to generate 10 ever more superior great right vows. What are those 10? They are, regarding those roots of goodness I have planted in previous lives and in this present life, I pray that all of these roots of goodness may be bestowed upon all of the boundlessly many beings and dedicated to the unsurpassed Bodhi. May it be that these vows of mine shall grow in each succeeding thought moment, shall be produced again in each successive lifetime, shall always be bound to my mind, shall never be forgotten, and shall be guarded and retained by Dharamis. Having already dedicated these roots of goodness to Bodhi, I pray that on account of these roots of goodness, no matter where I may be reborn, I shall always be able to make offerings to all Buddhas and shall definitely never be reborn in a land where there is no Buddha. Having already succeeded in being reborn in the lands of the Buddhas, I pray that I shall always be able to draw personally close to them, shall follow along and serve them in every way, shall remain as close to them as a shadow to its form, and shall never become distantly separated from the Buddhas even for the briefest of moments. Having already succeeded in drawing personally close to the Buddhas, I pray that they will then speak Dharma for my sake in accordance with whatsoever is appropriate for me. May I then straightway perfect the Bodhisattva's 5 super knowledges. Having already perfected the Bodhisattva's 5 super knowledges, I pray that I shall thereupon be able to reach a penetrating understanding of worldly truth together with its widespread artificial designations, that I shall also then completely comprehend in accordance with its genuine nature the foremost ultimate truth, and that I will gain right Dharma wisdom. Having already realized the right Dharma wisdom, I pray that free of any thoughts of aversion, I shall then explain it for the sake of beings, instructing them in the teachings, benefiting them, delighting them, and causing them all to develop an understanding of it. Having already become able to create the understanding of right Dharma in beings, I pray that availing myself to the spiritual power of the Buddhas, I shall be able to go to all worlds without exception, everywhere throughout the 10 directions, making offerings to the Buddhas, listening to and accepting right Dharma, and extensively drawing in beings to the Dharma. Having already received right Dharma in the abodes of the Buddhas, I pray that I shall thereupon be able to turn the wheel of the pure Dharma in accordance with it. May it then be that all beings of the 10 directions worlds who hear me proclaim the Dharma, or who merely hear my name, shall then straightway succeed in abandoning all afflictions and in generating the Bodhi resolve. Having already become able to cause all beings to generate the Bodhi resolve, I pray that I may constantly follow along with them, protecting them, ridding them of whatever is unbeneficial, bestowing on them countless sorts of happiness, relinquishing my life and wealth for their sakes, drawing in beings and taking on the burden of right Dharma. Having already become able to take on the burden of right Dharma, I pray that even though I shall then practice in accordance with right Dharma, my mind shall nonetheless have nothing whatsoever which it practices. May it be that in this I shall conform with the way that the Bodhisattvas themselves practice right Dharma, and yet have nothing whatsoever which they either practice or do not practice.
Whereas previously we held ourselves as most important, now we hold others as supreme. The benefits of doing this are enormous. Shantideva tells us, whatever joy there is in this world, all comes from desiring others to be happy. And whatever suffering there is in this world, all comes from desiring myself to be happy. Wow. That's not how we look at life, is it? We usually think the opposite. All joy comes from desiring myself to be happy, and all suffering comes from, helping those sentient beings who are so uncooperative, and it's so inconvenient and bothersome. And here it's exactly the opposite. Yeah? And the next paragraph really gets us, the next verse. What need is there to say much more? The childish work for their own benefit, while Buddhists work for the benefit of others. Just look at the difference between them. So we think benefiting ourselves is the way, self-centeredness is the way to happiness, and cherishing others is inconvenient. And the Buddhists think the opposite way, that cherishing themselves is the source of misery, and cherishing others is the source of happiness. And who is happier, us or the Buddhas? Yeah? It's very clear. The Buddhas are happy, and they think the opposite way of our self-centered thought. So is our self-centered thought telling us the truth when it says, I'm the most important, I've got to get my way? Yeah. Self-centered thought is fake news. Yeah. Completely fake news. Unabashedly fake news. Okay? It's like lying tweets. Yeah. Because, that's what self-centered thought is. It's like tweets, isn't it? These little spurts of, like, screw that person and work for yourself. Isn't that what it does? 147 characters? I heard they expanded it now. Yeah. Yeah. So now you can, your tweets can contain more fake news in them. Yeah. But that's exactly what our little bursts of self-centeredness are. We don't use long explanations, involved in reason. We just get right. Self-centeredness gets right to the point. I'm most important. Forget everybody else. Yeah. Short, sweet, simple, clear. And the source of misery. Okay, Bodhisattva's joy in exchanging self and others is much greater than any happiness we self-centered beings could even dream of. So this is, if we doubt that it's possible to exchange self with others, which means exchanging who we think is the most important and whose happiness is most important, if we think that it's impossible to do that, then how could you explain that Bodhisattva's joy in doing that is so much greater than our joy in just cherishing ourselves? We could never explain that, yeah? So it has to be the case that it's possible to exchange self and others in this way and be happy. Be happier than we are now. Yeah. The meditation on taking and giving deepens our love and compassion and ability to exchange self and others. Taking comes from the compassionate wish, I will take all problems, suffering, and defilements of other sentient beings on myself so that they may be free of them. Giving is motivated by love. I will give my body, possessions, and merit to others so that their wishes may be fulfilled. And Nagarjuna says, may I bear the results of their negativity, and may they have the results of all my virtue. So even our virtue, which, when you're a Dharma practitioner, comes to be something you cherish more than ice cream, then, you don't want to give away your virtue. It's something very precious, yeah? But here is Nagarjuna saying, may they experience the result of my virtue, may I experience their suffering. And Nagarjuna is much happier than we are. So this doesn't matter. What this doesn't mean, okay, that we have to deliberately inflict pain on ourselves and make ourselves suffer to prove that we are so compassionate and altruistic. Because if we're deliberately making ourselves suffer and resenting that, then we haven't done the meditation properly. Okay, so to do the meditation properly, we should really understand why, clinging on to our own self-centered happiness brings us misery, and why cherishing others brings us happiness. And then in our heart, want to cherish others and care for others, and we want to give up our self-centered thought. Okay? So this isn't a practice where we beat ourselves into submission, telling ourselves that we're so awful because we're guilty. Yeah? Because then our motivation isn't sincere, is it? We're just back to shoulds and ought tos and supposed tos. I shouldn't be so selfish. I'm not supposed to be so selfish. I should cherish others. I ought to be more considerate. That mind is not a Dharma mind. Yeah? A Dharma mind is a mind that's happy doing the whatever it is that's new, and it's a mind that understands why we're doing it and wants to do that. Okay? So we shouldn't be guilt-tripping our mind into being kind. Yeah? And I say this because sometimes we see examples. I know for myself, some of my teachers, how they practice is just amazing. And how they dedicate their lives for sentient beings is completely adala. And then I look at myself and I go, I should practice like them. I shouldn't sleep so much. I should work more for sentient beings. I should. Yeah. And and then the real guilt trip one is, if I only had more compassion, then I would do this, that, and the other thing. Yeah. See how selfish I am. If I only had more compassion, I would do something. I'm so selfish. Okay? And that's how we very often think that we often think that that's what it means to practice this. Yeah, because we were raised in families where we got guilt-tripped. Yeah. You're so selfish. You should share your lollipops with your brother. You should be more generous. And then we just take that in and treat ourselves the same way. Yeah, but that's not the Dharma mind. Okay, the Dharma mind has to really understand the situation deeply and want to give our happiness and our virtue and our possessions to others. Yeah, so there has to be a joy in doing it, not just, beating ourselves up with guilt. Okay, you got the point? This is important. Because otherwise our Dharma practice is just one psychological mess, isn't it? Yeah, it's just one big old guilt trip. And we don't need to learn the Dharma in order to guilt trip ourselves. We already know how to do that. So the Buddha is not trying to teach us, how to feel guilty and awful because we're so selfish. Now, the Buddha is trying to show us a totally different way to approach this situation. Okay, so we imagine taking all others' suffering upon ourselves, and we use this thought to destroy our self-centered attitude. So we take what others don't want, their dukkha, imagine taking it into ourselves and using it to destroy what we don't want, our own self-centeredness. Then we transform our body, wealth, and virtue into whatever others need and give these to others. Again, through the process of visualization in this meditation. Through this, they receive all they need, and we are freed from our self-preoccupation. Wouldn't that be nice to be freed from your self-preoccupation? Wouldn't it be nice? Yeah. Okay, now the section is self-interest, self-confidence, self-centered attitude, and self-grasping ignorance. Okay? So hearing about Bodhisattva's ability to cherish others more than themselves, we may doubt, if I abandon all self-interest and only cherish others, I will neglect myself and my suffering will increase. Cherishing others does not mean ignoring our own needs and caring only for others. If we did that, we would fall into a deplorable state in which benefiting others and practicing the Dharma would be nearly impossible. In that case, instead of our helping others, they would need to take care of us. Okay, so the point of exchanging self and others is not to mistreat ourselves, ignore ourselves, punish ourselves, and neglect our own needs. That's not what's going on in this meditation. Okay? But on the other hand, it isn't to indulge all of those things either. While one form of self-interest is selfish, stingy, and irritable, anybody like that? Yeah, selfish, stingy, irritable. Another form of another is wise self-interest that understands that benefiting ourselves and helping others need not be contradictory. As mentioned above, Bodhisattva's self-interest leads them to fulfill their own purpose by attaining a Buddha's Dharmakaya, which in turn enables them to benefit others through gaining a Buddha's form body. Okay, so helping self, helping others, it's not either or. Yeah, both come together at the same time. Because the more we're able to purify our own mind and gain realizations, then the more, we experience happiness and approach Buddhahood. And at the same time, the more we're able to benefit others. So those two things come together. Yeah. So we shouldn't see happiness as if somebody else gets it, I don't have it. Yeah. So happiness is in limited supply. So I have to look out for myself first. Yeah, that's a very skewed view from a Buddhist perspective. Rather, we want to see it that happiness and joy is abundant. There's plenty of it. So the more we give it to others, the more we experience it ourselves. Yeah. And if we look at our own experience, that's really true. Yeah. Remember last weekend I read that article from the New York Times, and they were saying, that people have done studies and that when people benefit other people, they feel very happy. Yeah. So there it is. I mean, they even verified it scientifically. Okay. And so, to really look at that in our own experience, because the thing is, when we are under the influence of self-centeredness, and I don't know about you, but my self-centeredness is very crafty, and it can develop all sorts of reasons that justify my selfish behavior. Yeah. So that I can twist it so that what I'm actually doing for a self-centered reason, I explain it to myself and I explain it to others and make it look like I'm being very magnanimous. Yeah? Any of you do that? No. Yeah. So, that self-centeredness, it explains and justifies the whole situation, so it looks okay. But the way I know that it isn't genuine is because in here I don't feel good. In here there's not real happiness. In here there's a feeling of, well, I connived and I did a good job with that, but I'm not really, I'm stuck in my self-centeredness, and I'm not happy with myself. Okay. So we don't want to stay in that state. It's a miserable state. So it's much better if we drop that and then let what you were saying, this spontaneous feeling of wanting to help others, that is kind of inborn in us. Yeah, because His Holiness always talks about, our whole experience when we're born is an experience of kindness. Yeah, because immediately people are taking care of us, even if the first thing they do is turn us upside down and whack us on the bottom. It's done with kindness. It's done to help us. Okay. Okay, similarly, while one sense of self, the self-grasping ignorance, is a troublemaker, stable and realistic self-confidence is necessary to accomplish the path. Bodhisattvas must have exceptionally strong self-confidence to be able to complete all the perfections. Free from arrogance, such self-confidence aspires for what is positive without clinging to it. Okay, so, His Holiness again emphasizes so often how bodhisattvas need to have very strong self-confidence, and that self-confidence is not arrogance. Yeah, in fact, arrogance usually comes from low self-esteem, because when we have low self-esteem, then we put on this show of arrogance, trying to convince ourselves and others that we're really worthwhile. When we really have self-confidence, we have no need to do that. We don't need to prove ourselves to anybody. We don't need to create an image. And in fact, we feel completely comfortable being humble. Yeah, so don't confuse self-confidence and arrogance. They're two different things. And don't confuse humility with low self-esteem. We can be humble and have self-confidence at the same time. In fact, that's the way the bodhisattvas are. Yeah, they're humble and they're confident. Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about this more, and I wondered what you thought. What came to my mind was that what impacts, for me, I realized, at least most recently, in a feeling of not having confidence and just whatever was going on, was a mixing up of who's responsible for what. Mm-hmm. And I realized that unless I really discern that well,
Yeah.
then I could feel quite powerless because I'm trying to control something that is not my share.
Yeah.
And I think this is what I have to be really, it takes a lot of analysis to figure out certain things.
Yeah.
Like what is my part and what really is not my part and I can't really contribute to.
Right. Yeah. Very important to distinguish that. What's my responsibility? What is others' responsibility? Because that's where we get really confused. We don't take responsibility for what is our responsibility, and instead we blame others. And then we take responsibility for things that aren't our responsibility, that we have no power to control, and we feel frustrated because we can't control the situation, and we feel angry because we can't get the other people to do what we want them to do. But if we're able to correctly distinguish, what's my part, what's their part, then all of that murky stuff disappears. Self-confidence is essential to begin, continue, and complete the path to awakening. And our Buddha nature is a valid basis on which to generate it. Reflecting on emptiness helps us to recognize our Buddha nature, for we see that the defilements are adventitious and can be removed. Compassion for others also builds self-confidence, as does remembering our precious human life, its meaning, purpose, and rarity. So those are the meditations we need to do to develop self-confidence. He listed them out for us. The self-centered attitude considers ourselves the most important, whereas self-grasping ignorance misapprehends how the self exists. Aside from the self-centered attitude's grosser manifestations, which are obviously detrimental, its subtler aspect seeks liberation for ourselves alone. In general, this is not an object of abandonment. It is an unmistaken mind that motivates Shravakas and Pratyeka Buddhas to fulfill their spiritual practice, their spiritual aspirations, generate virtuous qualities, and attain liberation, all admirable activities. However, self-centeredness is an object of abandonment for those following the Bodhisattva path to Buddhahood. Okay, is that making some sense to you?
You
Yeah.
can still be an arhat and have this self-centeredness, where to be a Buddha, I cannot have.
Right. Yeah. But we can't say, because it says here in general, okay, that means it's not going to apply to bodhisattvas. But in general, the self-centered attitude is not an object of abandonment. It is an unmistaken mind that motivates the hearers and the solitary realizers to fulfill their spiritual aspirations, generate virtuous qualities, and attain liberation. Okay? So in that respect, the self-centeredness is not an object of abandonment, and it's something useful for the hearers and the solitary realizers. But for people aspiring for Buddhahood and who want to practice the Bodhisattva path, then it is an object of abandonment, and it's seen as something useless. Okay, but for hearers and solitary realizers, it's something useful. You look puzzled.
I think it's the same old puzzlement that objects of abandonment need to be abandoned by paths. No? You have a different idea?
It's when you ask a Geshe about that, okay, you say, they'll say, yes, all objects of abandonment need to be abandoned by the path, and they fall into either afflictive obscurations or cognitive obscurations. And then you say, for a bodhisattva, does self-centeredness be to abandon? Yes. Then which obscuration is it, an afflictive one or a cognitive one? Neither.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And so it's called, sometimes it's called an inferior obscuration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? So it's still one for bodhisattvas that need to be abandoned, even though it's not a wrong consciousness.
I was going back one paragraph to the self-confidence.
Uh-huh.
And it says that compassion for others builds self-confidence.
Yes.
I just want to expand on that a little bit.
Okay. So when in one of the Mind and Life conferences that was in the early 90s, the topic of self-confidence and low self-esteem came up. And His Holiness was completely puzzled why Westerners suffer from it, especially because the people in the room, most of them were these, brilliant scientists with PhDs and tenure at universities and blah, blah. And His Holiness says, who has low self-esteem? And they all look at each other and say, we all do. And His Holiness is just like, what? But you're so successful. How come you have low self-esteem? Okay. And then after that, okay, I listened, and there was a change in how he was speaking about things. And he began to talk about compassion for others as being something that alleviates our own self-loathing and low self-esteem. And at first, I was puzzled because I was thinking of the thing that's commonly said, which is you have to have compassion for yourself before you have compassion for others. So why is His Holiness talking about having compassion for others when we can't stand ourselves? Shouldn't he be talking about compassion for ourselves? But when your teacher says something, even though you don't understand it, you keep it in mind and you think about it. So I thought about it some more. And what I understood was that when we have compassion for others, our focus is on the well-being of others. And that alleviates the unwise and self-centered focus on ourselves that makes us pick at ourselves, hate ourselves, chop ourselves down. Okay? Because the self-centered mind is just so self-critical and so judgmental. Yeah. And that same self-centered mind is the one that can't cherish others. And it's so focused on ourself that it just creates so much suffering for us inside. So I began to see that when we pay attention to other beings' experience, it alleviates that incorrect way of paying attention to ourselves. Yeah, it takes the wrong, self-scrutinizing, self-judgmental focus on ourselves, and instead, because our mind is focusing on others, yeah, so that helps alleviate the self-centeredness, and then also, as we become more compassionate and feel more connected to others, then our own self-confidence gradually increases. It just kind of naturally feels better. And as our behavior towards others change, also our self-confidence increases. Okay? So we usually think that self-confidence is built by other people praising us, by getting awards and trophies and acknowledgement. That's the way our whole lives, our self-confidence has been built. But that's not a very stable basis for self-confidence, because one person tells you you did well, and 15 minutes later, another person comes in and criticizes you. And then you get confused, you know, because people are telling you opposite things about yourself. And so if we rely on others for our own, to determine our own self-worth, we're going to be very, very confused. Okay? Whereas if we have an awareness of our Buddha potential, there's not going to be that confusion in our mind. Yeah, because we won't be looking outwards for self-validation. Because looking outwards for self-validation, it's kind of a dead end, you know? And also, another element in this is a lot of the things we want validation for are transient qualities that we're not going to have our whole life. Yeah. So if our self-confidence is based on being good looking, you know, when you hit a certain age and you're not so good looking anymore, your self-confidence is going to go kerplunk. Yeah. And so I look sometimes at the athletes, the actors, the actresses, you know, and the kind of unhappiness they face when, you know, they're in their 40s and 50s trying to look like they're in their 20s and not being successful, or being somewhat successful but fearing that, you know, of the time when they're not going to be able to do that. Yeah. Or if we base our self-esteem on, you know, being very intelligent, what's going to happen when we get old? You know, if we base our self-esteem on doing well in our career, what happens when, you know, when, you know, maybe the thing that we're so good at all of a sudden shuts down because it's old-fashioned. Okay. So all this stuff of looking outward for validation doesn't really meet the internal need. Mm-hmm. Whereas if we're compassionate with others, we automatically feel better about ourselves. The self-centered attitude is neither an afflictive nor a cognitive obscuration. It is not a pollutant and is not the root of samsara. Self-grasping, on the other hand, is the root of samsara and an afflictive obscuration that must be eradicated to attain both liberation and full awakening. The self-centered attitude and self-grasping have neither a causal relationship, one does not cause the other, nor a same nature relationship, which means if one exists in a person's mind stream, the other one doesn't necessarily exist. If they were same nature, both would have to be there. Arhats have eliminated self-grasping but have self-centeredness, and that's the subtler kind of self-centeredness. Bodhisattvas who freshly entered the bodhisattva path, that is, they are not arhats who later became bodhisattvas, and are below the eighth ground, have self-grasping, but do not necessarily have self-centeredness. The self-centered attitude and self-grasping ignorance also have different counterforces. Bodhicitta is the counterforce to the self-centered attitude, and the wisdom realizing emptiness is the counterforce to the self-grasping ignorance. Okay? So it's not that self-grasping causes self-centeredness or self-centeredness causes self-grasping. And it's not that if one is there in the mind stream, the other one has to be there too. Okay? So now the section on integrating the view with bodhicitta. When we consider emulating the deeds of the great bodhisattvas, our minds may be overcome with anxiety. What will happen to me if I altruistically help others? Yeah. Integrating either the Madhyamaka or Yogacarya view of emptiness helps us overcome this unnecessary and limiting fear. It aids our cultivation of bodhicitta by loosening the unrealistic grasping to self and others, to suffering and happiness, to friend, enemy, and stranger. It also deepens our compassion for sentient beings who are under the control of afflictions and karma. According to the Yogacarya view, the seemingly external objects that appear to our sense consciousnesses have arisen due to karmic latencies on the consciousness. While these objects, actually, they're not all due to karmic latencies. Some of them there's different kind of latencies. Anyway, while these objects do not exist as entities separate from our mind, they appear that way due to ignorance. In fact, they are like things in a dream, for they do not exist as they appear. Seeing both good and bad experiences as karmic appearances arising due to latencies on the mind stream loosens the solidity with which we view sentient beings and the environment. From this perspective, friends, enemies, and strangers are simply karmic appearances, and having attachment, anger, and apathy towards them is misguided. Similarly, attractive and unattractive objects, praise and blame, reputation and notoriety, and wealth and poverty simply appear to the mind due to the activation of latencies. They lack any external existence separate from the mind to which they appear. Therefore, there is no sense in clinging to some things and having aversion for others. Okay? So in the Yogacarya view, they say that there are no external objects in the sense that the perceiving mind and the object being perceived arise due to the same latency on the consciousness. Okay? So if everything is due to latencies, then the things that we think are external, and have some kind of objective existence separate from the mind, then that we realize that way that things appear to us is incorrect, and that actually the object being perceived and the subject mind perceiving it arise due to the same latency. Okay? And so when you see things like that, then you don't take external objects. You realize that the appearance of external objects is false. And when you see that, then you don't get so involved in those appearances. Something appears nice, okay. Something appears bad, okay. Because you realize they're just appearances to the mind. Okay, so they use the example of a dream, and that a dream, when you're in the middle of it and you don't realize that you're dreaming, then everything seems very real and you get so emotional about what happens in the dream. But when you wake up and you see that it's only a dream, then you relax about whatever you dreamed about. And if, when you're dreaming, you're able to lucid dream and realize it's only a dream, then even while those things are all appearing to you and you're dreaming, interrelating with them, you have this feeling that, they don't exist as they appear. So that loosens the whole way we relate to things. Okay, and so this kind of view can be very helpful, especially if we have a mind that is a very habitual to seeing threats or fearful things, or if we have a mind that's very habituated to grasping onto beautiful things and clinging to them, if we're able to look at those things and say, this is just an appearance to the mind, that's all. It's only an appearance to the mind. Then that helps us. We don't relate to the object so much as if it's a real thing there that's like imposing on our senses and we need to take care of it. Yeah. It's like, it's just an appearance, relax. Okay, you getting what I'm saying? Yeah. So that can be one very helpful way to integrate the view with bodhicitta, because then, we see, the appearance of friend, enemy, and stranger, good person, bad person, obscure person. We realize that's just an appearance to the mind. We don't latch on to, this person's marvelous and I'm going to cling to them, and that person's awful and I got to get rid of them. Okay. So our mind just becomes more spacious. Then, according to the Madhyamaka view, nothing exists from its own side. Everything exists by being merely designated by mind. So self and others exist dependent on labels or on imputation. Okay, there is no inherently existent I or others, and no inherently existent suffering or happiness. So just as this side of the valley and the other side of the valley are imputed in dependence on each other, self and others is imputed independence, happiness and suffering, mutually dependent on each other. And we see that how we impute things, or what we impute them on, what we impute them as, influences what our experience of them is. Okay? So if there's, and so this is, all the prejudice. If you can see, if we can be courageous and look at our own prejudice, when we see a person who looks a certain way, and our mind goes, I don't trust them. They must be like XYZ. Okay. We are totally imputing all of that opinion on them. We think that they are that. Yeah. Oh, they look scary. I better get away from them. But the scariness is something we're imputing on them. Somebody else may look at that same person and say they're not scary at all. Okay? So when we're able to see that, our judgments of people are so subjective and that things do not exist that way as they appear, that all of that is coming from us and our projection, then, it frees us to dissolve that projection and relate to people in a totally different way. Let me just finish this before, contemplating that these exist in mutual dependence and thus are empty of their own inherent nature lessens our fear of suffering and our clinging to our own happiness. In this way, our minds become more courageous and joyful in practicing the Bodhisattva deeds.
In comparing both of these views, from the Yogacara, we have, quote, these objects do not exist as entities separate from our mind.
Yeah.
And then Madhyamaka, we have, quote, everything exists by being merely designated by mind.
Mm-hmm.
How are those separate? Aren't those both equally things appear like as though in a dream? where they do not exist as they appear and they exist dependently upon each other?
Yeah. Both
Why aren't they both mind-only views then?
because the way what they say things are empty of and how they say the dependent arising comes about, those two things are different. But both of them agree that what we perceive with our senses is a false appearance, and they both agree that things do not exist the way they appear. But exactly what the falseness is, they have different views on that. Okay?
Can you clarify the
Okay,
difference?
so for the Yogacarya, the falseness is that the object appears independent from the conceiving mind or perceiving mind, when in reality, the substantial cause of both the consciousness and the object is a latency on the mind stream. The Madhyamikas say, no, that's not how appearances arise. Yeah, that's not exactly it. Yeah, the Madhyamikas say that things appear to have their own inherent nature. Yeah, and we may give them names, but then once we give them a name, we forgot that we gave them the name and we think that they have some inherent nature in them that is that object.
So would the Madhyamaka view, would the Yogacara view say that the forgetting that we designated the object, that in and of itself is a latency?
Getting that we designated the object, I don't think so. Yeah, because the Yogacarya, even though they say things are like dreams and that the subject and object are not two substantial entities, they still say that things are truly existent and have some kind of inherent nature. Because if they didn't have some inherent nature, then they wouldn't exist at all. Whereas the Madhyamikas say, nope, things have no inherent nature whatsoever. Okay? So, yeah, what they're negating is a bit different, and how they say dependent nature exists is a bit different.
So to flesh that out a little bit, I guess the mind only would say that the mind truly exists?
Yeah.
Or the consciousness that
Truly
perceives?
exists. Yeah.
Whereas Madhyamaka, no.
Madhyamaka says, no, consciousness doesn't truly exist. Okay. Yeah, so there's definitely some differences between them. Now, how to discriminate or discern those differences in our own perception and our own way of seeing things, that requires a lot of self-observation. And really, how do things appear to me and how am I thinking that they exist? Okay.
I just wanted to check in with you. This might be a very simple example of how the idea of emptiness helped me with some of the discouragement around the Bodhisattva path. Because I used to feel very discouraged thinking about the 3 countless great eons. And then it was like, oh, stream enterer 7 lifetimes. I don't know. I like having a quantifiable number.
Yeah.
And then at our full ordination, one of the teachers said, well, time is empty of inherent existence. So why are you afraid of working for 3 countless great eons? It's just imputed. Oh, they would say arising from the mind, right?
Yeah.
So why be afraid? And I was like, oh, that's true. I don't know. That was quite helpful.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, time is something, the experience of time is actually very subjective, isn't it? Yeah. And so if it's so subjective, why are we afraid of a number that like 3 countless great eons? When the whole experience of time is just, it's not something existing out there. Okay, I don't know if your mom said, my mom always said, when you're having a good time, time goes very quickly. Yeah? So, as a bodhisattva, if you're having a good time, then 3 countless great eons is nothing. Yeah? Okay, yeah?
We were talking about time being subjective, so is like...
No, our experience of time is subjective.
So is a lifetime like necessarily 70 years, and a certain amount of 70 years fits into an eon? Like, or can a lifetime be an eon? Because
different beings in different realms, their lifespans are different.
we want human lives throughout the Bodhisattva path.
Okay. They say when they talk about, like when you read the King of Prayers, it talks about how an eon is like a moment, and a moment can be an eon. So don't ask me how that works. I don't have that level of realization. Okay. When you get that level of realization, then you can explain it to me. Okay.
The reason that I have like the fear of the 3 countless great eons is because that's first of all, that's after you start the path.
Because what?
I think that's after you start
Yeah, that's after you have the you enter the path of accumulation.
Right, and until then, at any point, I could just totally get misguided and forget completely.
Yeah, so you better be careful.
Right.
Yeah, you better not space out.
But I don't have any control of what the next guy does.
Yeah, but
I remember reading something recently I remember reading something recently like you can be born in the light and go towards the dark. It's like or you can be born in the dark and go towards the light. Like it's totally up to personal choice whether or not. What I'm getting at is the next lifetime doesn't need to choose to continue being good. Like I can put all the imprints I want there.
Yeah, I mean, as long as you have the afflictive obscurations, afflictions are going to arise. Yeah, so that's why we have to work hard at diminishing the strength of our afflictive obscurations. Even if we can't cut their continuity completely, at least diminish their strength and at least get some good solid familiarity with the antidotes. Okay, and then really embellish our collection of merit and dedicate it for awakening and to have a series of precious human lives on the way to awakening. Yeah. So it's a tenuous situation, but there's ways to deal with it. Yeah, purify, gain control, try and diminish the strength of your afflictions by learning the antidotes. Yeah, and getting some habit in terms of the antidotes. Yeah, and then praying and directing your merit so it will ripen in the way you want. Don't direct your merit so you could be an Olympic star in your next life. Okay, that's totally wasting your merit. Yeah, but hold on, okay, but direct your merit in the way that you want it to ripen. Okay, so that's the whole idea behind the meditation on the precious human life is we have this incredible opportunity. It's rare and it's difficult to have it, and we don't know how long we're going to have it. And, if we aren't careful, because it's rare and difficult to have this, we won't have it again for a long time in the future. Yeah. So, what is it? Make hay while the sun shines. Yeah. So while you have the opportunity, purify and create merit and put lots of seeds of Dharma teachings in your mind. and don't just kind of like, well, I'm a college student. I'll just kind of, have a good time. And, when I'm old like those nuns, then I'll practice the Dharma.
You guys are a day over 40.
Yes.
Well, I was just thinking that this is also a part or a point where if we don't have self-confidence and can assess accurately what we are doing and that we have done some virtue and, are trying and such, if we don't ever let that in, then we're going to always feel like it's so far away, I think.
Yeah.
So we have to have an accurate assessment and not be so always hard on ourselves and always, it's never good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Very true. And this is the importance of rejoicing in our own merit.
I think for me that some of the stories that we've heard from people help me a lot in this way, and especially the one where a friend of ours was going into like a brain surgery, and she did this really strong medicine Buddha practice and mantra and everything going in while they were putting her under, and when she came out, she was still doing that. It carried her through even all the anesthesia and all of that. It's just a normal person like you and me who's been practicing for some years. But it wasn't like, out of the reach, that our mind, that kind of intention, just a normal person.
Yeah. So now we're on the section about Chinese Buddhism. Okay, so Nagarjuna is also in the lineage of Chan Buddhism and Pure Land Buddhism, and there's a Madhyamaka school in China, so he's in that lineage. Okay, so Nagarjuna's Dasabhumika Kanibasa. Oh, so it's something on the 10 sutras, the 10 bhumis, 10 grounds. Okay, so that text speaks of 7 factors that may cause people to generate bodhicitta depending on their dispositions and tendencies. So here are some things that can stimulate the generation of bodhicitta in us. Not that, this happens one time and boing, bodhicitta comes, but, when this is cultivated in our mind. So one is being instructed by a Buddha who understands their faculties. Yeah, so that's one way that people can generate bodhicitta. 2 is observing that the Dharma is on the verge of destruction in our world and wanting to guard and protect it. So that can be a very powerful motivating factor for generating bodhicitta if you're afraid of that the existence of the Buddha Dharma is going to degenerate so much in this world that it will be impossible for people to meet correct teachings, and that's of strong concern to you, that can really stimulate you to generate bodhicitta as a way of counteracting that and preventing that from happening. 3 is feeling compassion for suffering sentient beings. Clearly, that's going to be a cause of bodhicitta. 4 is receiving instructions from a bodhisattva who influences us to generate bodhicitta. 5 is observing the conduct of a bodhisattva and wanting to emulate it. So sometimes we see people whose conduct and whose vibe, is just rather amazing, and we think, wow, I want to become like that person. And that can be a very strong motivating factor for us. And then 6 is having performed an action of generosity that makes us recall the virtues of bodhisattvas. Yeah, so sometimes when you're generous, it makes you think of, of bodhisattvas' generosity, and then we develop that aspiration to be like the bodhisattvas. 7, feeling delight upon seeing or hearing about the 32 signs and 80 marks of a Buddha. So those are physical signs on the Sambhogakaya and Nirmanakaya forms of a Buddha. And so just hearing about the qualities of a Buddha's body, then feeling very inspired to attain that same kind of body. Okay. So those can all be different things that, according to our personality and our disposition, can stimulate us to greater or lesser extents to generate bodhicitta. Are there special ones when I read that list that really stuck out for you, and you said, yes, that one's important for me? What was number 2? Observing the dharmas on the verge of destruction. Yeah. And number 3 for you, which was feeling compassion for suffering sentient beings. 5, observing the conduct of bodhisattvas and wanting to emulate it. Yeah. Huh? So, so you can see that, each of us are different, and so those different factors can inspire us to greater or lesser degrees. People may generate bodhicitta due to any of these 7 causes and conditions. However, only those who have generated bodhicitta in the first 3 ways will certainly attain full awakening. This is because the roots of virtue created by generating bodhicitta in those 3 ways are very deep, while the roots of virtue created in the other 4 ways are not necessarily firmly established. However, by practicing well and stabilizing their roots of virtue, the latter group will also attain Buddhahood. Then Shishan, how do I say his name? Sishixan. Shishan. This master's name, Shishan, who lived in the 17th century and early 18th century, a meditation master and a Pure Land patriarch. In his book, Exhortation to Resolve on Buddhahood, gives 10 points for reflection to spur the generation of bodhicitta. But first, to ensure we cultivate bodhicitta purely and properly, he discusses 4 pairs of distinctions in practitioners' bodhicitta. Okay, so practitioners who do not examine their minds, but instead seek wealth, fame, and sense pleasure, practice perversely. It's hard to even call those people practitioners. Those unattached to personal profit, reputation, and pleasure, either in this life or the next, practice correctly. So he's saying for a bodhisattva, it's not sufficient. Or for somebody who wants to enter the bodhisattva vehicle, it's not sufficient simply to seek one's good fortune for oneself in the next life. Constantly directing the mind to the Buddhist path, trying to benefit sentient beings with every thought, and being undeterred by having to practice bodhicitta for eons is genuine resolve. Neglecting to purify destructive karma, undertaking projects with enthusiasm but not completing them, and having virtuous thoughts mixed with attachment to wealth and reputation constitute false resolve. So he's being pretty blunt here. so that, trying to help us get on the right track in the way we generate bodhicitta. Resolving to attain full awakening and keep the bodhicitta motivation and bodhisattva precepts until all sentient beings have become awakened is great resolve. Aspiring only for personal liberation without caring for others indicates small resolve. Thinking that the Buddha's path is outside our mind and remaining attached to our own merit, knowledge, and views is one-sided. Generating bodhicitta, taking the bodhisattva precepts, and practicing the perfections with a mind supported by wisdom realizing emptiness is perfect. So distinguishing, bodhicitta according to those 4 pairs. So understanding these 8 distinctions, we must continuously examine our mind to ensure our bodhicitta is correct, genuine, great, and perfect. Done in this way, our practice will certainly be successful. Okay. Then the first 5 of the 10 points for reflection to inspire us to generate bodhicitta are mindfulness of the great kindness we have received from the Buddha and from our parents, teachers, benefactors, and all sentient beings. Okay, recognizing, so that those may be the first 5 of the 10. The kindness of Buddhas, parents, teachers, benefactors, and all sentient beings. Okay? Recognizing this inspires us to repay their kindness by generating bodhicitta and practicing the bodhisattva path. The remaining 5 points support and direct our bodhicitta. Okay, so we should, 1, be mindful of the suffering of repeated birth and death in samsara, so that we will continually want ourselves and others to be free from it. Respect our Buddha nature and not put ourselves down and have self-confidence. Think of the disadvantages of non-virtuous karma, repent and purify. So abandon negative actions and purify the ones that we have created already. That was the 3rd. Then the 4th, aspire to be born in the Pure Land. So that's a very good aspiration. And 5, pray that the Buddha's pure teachings remain in our world forever. Okay, so those, the first 5 of those points are mindfulness of the great kindness that we've received from others, and then the remaining 5 support and direct our bodhicitta. Okay. Bodhisattvas maintain these 4 vows. Whoops, how did we get to 4 vows? We skipped a page, that's how. Okay. Then Shishan counsels us, do not, fearing difficulty, shrink back in timidity. Do not, regarding this matter as easy, take it but lightly. Do not, seeking a swift conclusion, fail to make a long-enduring commitment. Do not claim that a single thought is insignificant. Short, concise, wise advice, isn't it? Yeah, do not, facing difficulty, shrink back in timidity. Yeah. So if any time there's some problem, we just get afraid and we say, I can't do it and it's too hard, then we're never going to get anywhere. Okay, so don't fear difficulty, because difficulties can be overcome. Maybe not as quickly as you want them overcome, but they can be overcome. Okay. Then do not see, regarding this matter as easy, take it but lightly. Yeah, so don't go to the other extreme and say, oh, attaining Buddhahood is a cinch, I can do this, like this, so I don't really need to try very much. Yeah, that's not so smart either, okay? Because it takes a long time and it implies, putting in a lot of energy. Do not, seeking a swift conclusion, fail to make a long enduring commitment. Because if we're only looking for the goal and the end and we want to get there quickly, then we're going to have no enthusiasm and no patience for completing the path. We're just going to be totally goal oriented. And then if the goal doesn't come as quickly as we want, then we throw up our hands and say, forget it. And then what happens? Not good. Do not claim that a single thought is insignificant. Yeah. So the only time we have to practice is now, so every thought matters. Yeah. So don't kind of just let the mind wander and say, well, it's no big thing. I'm having this, incredible daydream filled with attachment. It's like no big thing. But, really respect yourself and, try to guide your mind so it has good thoughts. Okay.